What happens when a powerful lawyer calls a grieving black mother irrelevant, right in front of a jury? He thought he could dismiss her pain, erase her dignity, and silence her voice. But what unfolded next turned the courtroom upside down and left everyone stunned. This is not just a courtroom story. It's a story of arrogance meeting truth, of prejudice meeting resilience, and of one mother who refused to be erased. Today, we take you inside a trial where injustice tried to speak louder than love and lost. The courtroom was silent. You could hear the shuffle of papers, the faint hum of the air conditioner above, and the nervous tapping of a juror's pen against the wood. And then, like a blade cutting across that silence, a lawyer's voice rang out. "Your Honor, the testimony of this woman is irrelevant." His hand gestured toward her. A black mother sitting at the witness stand, clutching the edges of her chair as though holding herself together. Irrelevant. That was the word he chose to describe her. To strip her story of weight. To erase her pain. But what no one in that room realized, not the arrogant lawyer, not the skeptical judge, not even the restless jury, was that this mother carried with her a truth so powerful, so undeniable, that by the end of the trial, the word irrelevant would be shattered forever. The courtroom was silent. Not the kind of silence you find in a library. Not the silence of peace or focus. This was the heavy silence of judgment. The kind that makes every cough sound like a confession. The kind that makes every shuffle of paper feel like a warning. The jury sat in 2 neat rows. Their faces a careful mask of neutrality. 12 strangers staring at the lives of others as though peering through glass. They had been told to keep their emotions aside. To judge only by the facts. But even here, emotions hung thick in the air. The bailiff called for order. The judge raised his hand to begin the day's proceedings. And then the defense lawyer rose from his seat. Richard Calloway. His suit was pressed to perfection. His shoes reflected the courtroom lights like mirrors. He adjusted his tie as if he were preparing for a photo shoot. And when he stood as though the ground beneath him was a stage built only for him. He cleared his throat, turned toward the jury with a confident smile. And then he pointed toward the woman sitting at the witness stand. "Your Honor," he said, his voice loud, measured, commanding. "The testimony of this woman is irrelevant." The words landed like a slap. The gallery shifted, whispers buzzing at the edges of the room. One juror blinked rapidly as if trying to process what he had just heard. Another pressed her lips together, pen frozen above her notepad. Irrelevant. That was the word. That was the dagger he threw without hesitation. The woman at the stand, Monica Harris, didn't flinch right away. Her spine stayed straight. Her face calm. But under the surface, her chest tightened, her stomach turned. Her hands gripped the wood of the chair until her nails dug deep into the finish. Irrelevant. He had called her irrelevant. Her life. Her pain. Her voice. Dismissed in one smooth word. She wanted to speak. To shout. To tell him who she was and who her son had been. But her lawyer placed a steadying hand on the table, a quiet signal to wait. So Monica swallowed her words and held them behind clenched teeth. Calloway continued. He turned to the jury, walking with the slow stride of a man who believed he owned the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we are here to discuss facts. Evidence. Not emotions. Not stories meant to stir your sympathies. This woman, though clearly devastated by her loss, has no bearing on what actually happened the night of October 14th. She was not there. She cannot speak to the actions of the officers. Her testimony is, quite simply, irrelevant." The word echoed again, bounced off the walls, buried itself in the wood of the benches. Irrelevant. Monica's throat burned. She wanted to stand. To ask him if he knew the nights she sat awake waiting for her son to come home. If he knew the prayers whispered into the dark, begging that Jamal would be safe in a world that rarely welcomed boys like him. If he knew the dreams scribbled on paper, the goals he spoke out loud, the way his laughter could fill a room with sunlight. But she stayed still. Because she knew her moment hadn't come yet. The judge glanced at Monica, then at Calloway. He leaned forward slightly, tapping his gavel once, more to regain order than to reprimand. "Mr. Calloway, The court will determine the admissibility of testimony. Proceed with your cross-examination." Calloway smirked as if he had already won. He turned back toward Monica, his voice smooth, sharp, deliberate. "Mrs. Harris, you were not present at the scene when officers discharged their weapons, correct?" Monica's voice was quiet but steady. "No, I was not. And you cannot testify as to what your son was thinking in those moments, can you?" "No, I cannot. And your knowledge of the events is based solely on what you were told after the fact." "Yes." He nodded as though her answers had proven his point. Then he turned to the jury once again. "You see? Irrelevant." The word cut again. And this time, Monica closed her eyes. Behind those closed eyes came a memory. A memory she hadn't expected, but one that forced itself forward. It was Jamal at 8 years old, standing on the cracked sidewalk outside their apartment, holding up his report card with both hands. "Mom, I got all A's," he had shouted, grinning so wide his cheeks hurt. She had hugged him so tightly that day, kissed his forehead, whispered, "You are my everything." Was that irrelevant? Was every sacrifice, every long night at work to keep food on the table irrelevant? Was the life she poured into her son's future irrelevant? She opened her eyes again and met Calloway's gaze. Her lips did not move, but her eyes spoke. Not irrelevant. Never irrelevant. But Calloway couldn't read those eyes. He saw only what he wanted to see. A woman to be dismissed. A voice to be silenced. The courtroom shifted back into routine. Witnesses brought in, evidence presented, arguments exchanged. But the word lingered. It lingered in Monica's chest like a stone. It lingered in the minds of the jurors like a whisper they couldn't shake. For the next 3 days, the defense built their wall. Witness after witness walked to the stand. A psychologist in a Navy suit, speaking about split-second decisions and reasonable fear. A criminology professor explaining charts and statistics about encounters gone wrong. A data analyst flipping through slides that reduced human lives into numbers and percentages. Each one chipped away at Jamal's humanity. Each one tried to paint the officers as victims of circumstance. And through it all, Monica sat and listened. She clenched her jaw. She tapped her thumb against her leg to steady her nerves. She whispered prayers no one else could hear. At night, when she went home, she sat at the edge of her bed and opened the small black notebook she kept in her bag. Jamal's notebook. The one he carried everywhere. The one filled with dreams, with goals, with thoughts he never shared out loud. She read his words under the glow of a lamp until tears blurred the ink. And each time she closed it, she whispered to herself, "When the time comes, they will hear you, Jamal. They will hear you." By the 4th day, Monica's attorney, Danielle Brooks, was ready. Danielle was young, but her presence carried weight. She had walked into the courtroom every morning with a calm defiance, her eyes scanning the room as if daring anyone to underestimate her. She knew the system. She knew the way it tried to silence voices like Monica's. And she had promised herself long ago, today, silence would not win. She rose slowly, smoothly, and addressed the court. "Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff calls Mrs. Monica Harris back to the stand." The room shifted. The jury adjusted in their seats. The gallery leaned forward. Even the judge tilted his head slightly, curious. Monica walked back to the stand. Her legs felt heavy, but her heart beat strong. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore her oath, and sat again. Danielle approached gently, her voice soft but firm. "Mrs. Harris," she began, "you've listened patiently to testimony for several days now. But today, I want to give you a chance to share something in your own words. Could you tell the court what you brought with you?" Monica's hands trembled as she reached into her bag. The small black notebook appeared. Worn at the edges. Bent at the spine. But filled with her son's voice. The gallery whispered. The jury leaned closer. And Danielle opened the book carefully to a marked page. Her voice caught slightly as she began to read aloud. "One day, I'll be the first in my family to graduate college. I want to make my mom proud. She gave up everything for me. She's my hero." The room froze. Not a cough. Not a shuffle. Not a sound. Monica closed her eyes, letting the words wash over her. She could hear Jamal's voice in them. She could see him sitting at the kitchen table, pen in hand, writing dreams onto paper that would outlive him. Danielle turned another page. And then she read the line that broke the silence like thunder. "If anything ever happens to me, I want my mom to fight for me. Because I know she will." Monica wept then. Quiet tears spilling down her face. But her voice, when she finally spoke, was steady. "He knew me. He knew I wouldn't stop. He knew I would fight for him." The jury blinked back tears. A man in the front row swallowed hard, his throat tight. A woman clutched the arms of her chair, knuckles pale against the wood. And across the room, Richard Calloway stood abruptly, his voice loud and frantic. "Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay, irrelevant." But the words rang hollow. They sounded desperate. They sounded weak. Because in that moment, everyone in the courtroom knew. This mother was not irrelevant. Her voice carried her son's truth. And nothing Calloway said could erase it. The gavel struck once. Sharp. Commanding. But not convincing enough to erase what had just been heard. The notebook still sat on the stand in front of Monica. Black cover. Bent spine. Words that had cracked the courtroom wide open. Richard Calloway straightened his jacket. He adjusted his tie as though tightening it might tighten his grip on the case. He stepped forward, his voice cutting through the air like a blade desperate to stay sharp. "Mrs. Harris," he said, his tone dripping with forced calm. "With all due respect, a personal journal does not constitute factual evidence. You understand that, don't you?" Monica's eyes lifted slowly to meet his. Her voice quiet, but unshaken. "I understand my son's words are real." Calloway smirked slightly, turning toward the jury as if they were his private audience. "And real, ladies and gentlemen, is not always relevant. We are here for facts. Not for emotion. Not for sentimental writing. Not for grief that clouds judgment." The word again. Relevant. He leaned on it like it was his weapon. But this time, it didn't land the way he wanted. A juror in the second row shifted uncomfortably. Another leaned back, crossing his arms, eyes narrowing at Calloway's smugness. The gallery whispered, tension buzzing like static electricity across the room. Danielle Brooks rose from her seat. "Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is testifying instead of questioning." "Sustained," the judge replied, his gavel striking lightly, his voice carrying just enough firmness to remind Calloway he was not the only power in the room. Calloway's smile faltered for just a second. But he pressed forward. "Mrs. Harris," he said, stepping closer, "your son wrote those words in private, did he not?" Monica nodded slowly. "Yes, he did. And you cannot prove when they were written, can you?" Her fingers brushed the edge of the notebook, tender, protective. "No, I cannot. But I know his handwriting. I know his heart. And those words are his." Calloway exhaled sharply, pacing. "So then we are left with words without context, aren't we? Words that could have been written at any time. Words influenced by movies, music, teenage dramatics. Would you agree, Mrs. Harris, that teenagers write things they don't always mean?" Monica blinked once. The memory came before her lips could move. Jamal at 16, slumped at the kitchen table after failing his driving test the first time. Frustrated, embarrassed. He had scribbled furiously in his notebook, muttering under his breath. But when she picked up the page later, she read, "I'll try again. I won't give up. Mom says setbacks don't define me." She smiled through tears at the memory, then looked back at Calloway. My son meant what he wrote. Every word. The jury felt it. They could hear the conviction in her tone. And Calloway knew it too. He clenched his jaw, forcing composure. He changed tactics. "Mrs. Harris, let's move away from the journal for a moment. You've painted your son as a dreamer, a student, a boy with a future. But are you aware that on his social media account, he once posted a picture holding what appeared to be a BB gun?" Gasps rippled through the gallery. Calloway seized the moment, pacing in front of the jury like a predator circling its prey. "Ladies and gentlemen, perception matters. Officers don't have the luxury of hindsight. They act on what they see. And if this young man displayed himself in ways that appeared threatening, then isn't it reasonable to suggest? Danielle shot up. Objection. Counsel is attempting to character assassinate a deceased victim through irrelevant social media postings. The judge raised his brow. Mr. Calloway, you will tread carefully. Calloway nodded with exaggerated politeness. Of course, Your Honor. I'll rephrase. He turned back to Monica, his eyes sharp. Mrs. Harris, do you deny that your son sometimes presented himself in ways that could be misinterpreted? Monica's lips parted, then closed again. Her throat tightened. She could almost see Jamal again, 13 years old, begging her for a pair of sneakers everyone else at school seemed to have. She had worked an extra weekend shift, scrubbing hospital floors until her hands ached, just to afford them. When she gave them to him, his face lit up brighter than the sun. He had worn them proudly, posing for a photo, sneakers on display, smile wide as the sky. That was the boy she saw. Not the BB gun photo. Not the narrative Calloway was trying to twist. Her boy. Her light. She took a breath, steady and slow. My son was a teenager. He had fun. He posed for pictures. He laughed with his friends. But nothing he ever did made him dangerous. Nothing made him deserve what happened to him. Her words struck deeper than Calloway expected. The jury's eyes softened again. The gallery murmured. Even the judge glanced toward her with the faintest flicker of something human in his gaze. Calloway's rhythm faltered. His script wasn't working the way it usually did. He tapped his pen against the podium, thinking, recalibrating. He leaned in closer. So you expect this jury to believe, Mrs. Harris, that you knew every thought in your son's mind? Every action he took? That he was perfect? Her voice rose then. Not in anger. But in clarity. No. He wasn't perfect. He was human. But he was mine. And being human does not mean being disposable. The gallery erupted. Applause. Gasps. A wave of sound that broke through the gavel strikes demanding order. The judge banged 3 times before the room quieted. But something had shifted. The jury was no longer just hearing testimony. They were feeling it. They were seeing Monica not as a witness, but as a mirror of their own families. Their own children. Calloway's face tightened. For the first time in the trial, he looked unsettled. But he pressed on, his pride refusing to let go. Mrs. Harris, he said firmly, you claim your son was planning for his future. You claim he had dreams. But dreams don't always come true, do they? People write things, say things, hope for things that never happen. Isn't it possible your son's words were just that? Hopes. Nothing more. Nothing grounded in reality. Monica's eyes glistened with tears, but her voice did not waver. You want to talk about reality, Mr. Calloway? Let me tell you about reality. The courtroom leaned in. Every juror. Every spectator. Even the stenographer paused her typing for a second. She inhaled, gathering strength from memories she had carried alone for too long. Reality is my son walking across a stage at his middle school graduation with a medal around his neck. Reality is him studying late into the night for his essay test because he wanted to be the first in our family to go to college. Reality is him hugging me after every basketball game, win or lose, and saying, "Did I make you proud, Mom?" Reality is a boy who had plans. And now, reality is me sitting here, burying my child while you call me irrelevant. The silence that followed was electric. The jury's faces told the story, eyes wet, jaws clenched, hands frozen mid-note. Even the judge's hand lingered on the gavel, unmoving, as though striking it would break the moment's gravity. Calloway swallowed hard, his composure slipping. He muttered something about no further questions, his voice quieter than before. He walked back to his table stiffly, his face pale with frustration. Danielle Brooks rose slowly, gracefully, as if she had been waiting for this moment all along. She approached Monica, her tone warm, reverent. "Mrs. Harris, thank you. No further questions at this time." Monica stepped down from the stand, each step heavy but certain. She returned to her seat, clutching the notebook in her hands. She whispered under her breath. "They heard you, Jamal. They heard you. The jury couldn't hear it. They couldn't see it. The wall Calloway had built for 3 days had started to crumble. And behind it, the truth was shining through. The jurors filed into the deliberation room with the same stiffness people carry at funerals. No one wanted to be the first to speak. No one wanted to breathe the wrong word. They set down their notebooks, their styrofoam cups, their bottled water. The heavy wooden door closed behind them with a finality that seemed to seal them in. This was it. 12 people. One verdict. A boy's life. A mother's dignity. And a nation of invisible witnesses waiting to see what they would do. At first, silence. The sound of chairs scraping across the linoleum floor. The shuffle of papers. A cough. Then, finally, a voice. "So," said juror number 8, a balding man with glasses perched low on his nose. "Where do we even start?" Juror number 3, a white woman in her 50s with arms crossed tight, spoke before anyone else could. "We start with the facts. And the fact is, this young man resisted arrest." Her words cut through the air. A few nodded, hesitant. Others frowned. Juror number 11, a black teacher in her 30s named Tanya, leaned forward. "That's not what I heard. What I heard was a boy who tried to ask why he was being stopped. What I heard was hesitation, not resistance." Juror number 3 scoffed. "Semantics." And just like that, the battle lines appeared. They argued over the videos. Over the officer's body cam. Over the grainy footage from a nearby store. Some saw defiance. Others saw confusion. Some saw threat. Others saw fear. But then, slowly, someone mentioned the notebook. Juror number 6, a young Latino mechanic with grease still under his fingernails, tapped the table with a thick finger. "Look, you can spin the videos however you want. You can argue about gestures, tone, whatever. But you can't spin that notebook. That was his handwriting. Those were his dreams. That was his heart." Silence followed. Because they had all felt it. Even those who wanted to dismiss it. Juror number 3 bristled. "Emotions don't win cases. We can't convict on feelings." Tanya's eyes flashed. "It's not feelings. It's humanity. You're trying to strip him down to a headline, a statistic. But that notebook proves he was a person. A son. A dreamer. And if the defense tried so hard to bury that, what does that tell you?" The room stirred. Some jurors shifted, suddenly uncomfortable. Then juror number 9, an older black man with gray hair and a preacher's cadence, leaned in. "Let me tell you something. I buried a son once. Not the same way, but gone just the same. You don't forget the sound of dirt hitting a coffin. You don't forget the silence that follows. And I'll tell you this, the way that lawyer looked at her, called her irrelevant? That told me everything I needed to know about what side of truth he stands on." The air thickened. The weight of Jamal's absence sat in the room like a 13th juror. But still, resistance lingered. Juror number 4, a young white man in his 20s, leaned back in his chair. "I'm not saying the lawyer was right. But we can't ignore the officer's testimony either. They said he looked like he was reaching for something." The words hovered, dangerous. Juror number 6 shot back. "And what did they find? Nothing. No gun. No knife. No weapon. Just a wallet. And now a mother's burying her son because he moved too fast." The debate raged. Back and forth, hours bleeding into one another. Voices rose, tempers flared, tears slipped. Bias battled with evidence. Fear wrestled with compassion. At one point, Tanya slammed her palm on the table. "Do you hear yourselves? You're debating whether his life had value. You're debating whether a mother's love is evidence. Do you know how cruel that sounds?" Juror number 3 shook her head, stubborn. "We're debating law, not feelings." "No," Tanya whispered fiercely. "You're debating whether you can live with yourselves after this." The room went quiet. And then, almost like a whisper carried on the wind, someone repeated the line from Jamal's notebook. "If anything ever happens to me, I want my mom to fight for me." The words echoed. One juror mouthed them silently. Another rubbed her temples. Another closed his eyes. It was as though Jamal himself was sitting in that room, watching, waiting. Slowly, the scales began to shift. One by one, doubts hardened into conviction. One by one, excuses dissolved into shame. One by one, jurors who had leaned toward dismissal began to lean toward justice. It wasn't unanimous yet, but the momentum had changed. The lawyer's arrogance had backfired. By trying to erase Monica, he had elevated her. By calling her irrelevant, he had made her indispensable. Juror number 9 said it aloud. That boy may be gone, but his mother made sure he still had a voice. And if we silence that voice now, then we're no better than the man who pulled the trigger. The room stilled. Even juror number 3 had no immediate reply. Her lips tightened, but her eyes betrayed something, hesitation. Maybe even doubt. And so the hours dragged on. Votes were taken. Arguments recycled. But with each round, the number grew. 7 for conviction. Then 8. Then 9. Then 10. The tide was turning. And outside that locked door, Monica sat in the hallway, hands clasped in prayer, unaware that the words her son had scribbled late at night were now shaking the conscience of 12 strangers. The courtroom was too quiet. Too still. You could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights, the shuffle of the bailiff's shoes, the way people's breathing seemed to sink in the air. The jury had been gone for hours. Now, they were back. Monica sat in the front row, hands folded tightly in her lap, knuckles pale from pressure. Her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. She was a mother waiting to see if her child's name would be vindicated or erased forever. The lawyer stood smug at the defense table, adjusting his tie, whispering to his co-counsel with the confidence of a man who thought he had already won. He glanced at Monica with a faint smirk, as if to remind her of the word he'd thrown at her like a dagger, irrelevant. The judge cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, have you reached a verdict?" The foreman, juror number 9, the older black man with the preacher's cadence, rose slowly. His hands trembled just slightly as he held the folded paper. He looked not at the judge, not at the lawyers, but at Monica. His eyes locked with hers, carrying weight, carrying sorrow, carrying justice. "Yes, Your Honor. We have." The paper was passed to the bailiff. The bailiff passed it to the judge. The judge unfolded it. Time slowed. Every heart seemed to pause. The judge's voice was steady, but in the silence, it landed like thunder. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty." The words shattered the room. Gasps. Cries. A rush of breath as though the whole gallery had been holding its lungs hostage. Monica's hands flew to her mouth. Tears spilled instantly, hot, uncontrollable, unashamed. Her body shook with relief, with grief, with the impossible collision of both. The lawyer's face drained of color. The smirk dissolved. His jaw tightened, eyes narrowing, trying to mask the shock but failing. The jury was polled. One by one, each affirmed. Yes. Guilty. Yes. Guilty. Yes. Guilty. 12 voices, 12 affirmations, each one hammering another nail into the coffin of arrogance. The defense table was silent now. The lawyer, once loud, once dismissive, once so sure of his narrative, now sat frozen. His client stared at him with fury, betrayal flashing in his eyes. And then, the moment of poetic justice came. The judge leaned forward, voice low, deliberate. Before sentencing, this court wishes to make an observation. The defense attempted repeatedly to diminish the testimony of Mrs. Monica Lewis, referring to her as irrelevant. The word hung heavy in the air, remembered by all. The judge's eyes flicked to the lawyer, sharp, unforgiving. But this court finds that Mrs. Lewis was not only relevant, she was essential. Her testimony illuminated the truth. Her strength ensured that her son's voice was not silenced. And let it be known, in this court, no mother seeking justice for her child will ever be considered irrelevant. The gallery erupted. Applause burst forth despite the bailiff's attempts at order. Tears, nods, cheers muffled by hands pressed to faces. The sound wasn't just approval, it was vindication. The lawyer sat stone still, heat rising up his neck, humiliation cutting deeper than any legal loss. His own arrogance had been weaponized against him, flipped into the very judgment that condemned his case. Monica rose slowly, steadied by Tanya, the juror who had fought so hard for Jamal in that deliberation room. The two women's eyes met, a silent bond exchanged. Different roles, same fight. Reporters scribbled. Cameras clicked. People whispered. But Monica heard none of it. She only heard her son's voice in her memory. If anything ever happens to me, I want my mom to fight for me. She had. And she had won. When court adjourned, people gathered around her. Strangers hugged her. Elders blessed her. Even some jurors came forward, shaking her hand, thanking her for giving them the courage to see clearly. The lawyer slipped out a side door, no cameras chasing him now. His reputation, once sharp and intimidating, would forever carry the stain of that single word turned against him. He had tried to erase a mother's relevance, and instead, he erased his own. As Monica stepped outside, the evening sun broke through heavy clouds. For the first time in months, she lifted her face to the warmth and let it touch her skin. It felt like her son's hand, resting gently on her shoulder. She whispered, barely audible, "We did it, baby. We did it." And in that moment, justice wasn't just a verdict. It was a reclamation of dignity. It was a mother standing tall in the face of dismissal. It was a community learning that silence is complicity, but truth spoken aloud can move mountains. The moral hung unspoken, yet carved into every heart that had witnessed the trial. Never dismiss the voice of the unheard. Never underestimate a mother's fight. And never forget, the most irrelevant person in the room may be the one who changes everything. The courthouse steps were crowded. Reporters jostled for position, microphones flashing, cameras craning, voices calling Monica's name. But she didn't rush. She walked slowly, carefully, each step deliberate, like she was finally stepping out of the shadow of dismissal and into the light of truth. Her sister was at her side. Tanya, the juror who had become something more than a stranger, walked just behind. They flanked her like guardians, but she needed no protection now. The world had seen her. The world had heard her. A journalist shouted, "Mrs. Lewis, what do you have to say about being called irrelevant?" Monica paused. Her eyes scanned the sea of faces. She didn't flinch. Her voice was steady, strong, carrying past the microphones and beyond the cameras. "Irrelevant," she said, letting the word hang. "That's what they called me. That's what they thought of a mother who lost her child. But let me tell you something, every mother matters. Every voice matters. And the day we start letting people decide who's relevant and who's not, that's the day justice dies." Silence fell for a heartbeat. Then the crowd erupted, not in questions this time, but in applause. Spontaneous. Genuine. The kind that shook walls and stirred souls. Inside, the lawyer stood at a window, watching the scene unfold. His client was gone, led away in handcuffs. His co-counsel avoided his gaze. Reporters weren't chasing him. They weren't quoting his sharp arguments. They weren't replaying his courtroom jabs. No, they were amplifying the very woman he had dismissed. His name was tied now not to victory, not to prestige, but to arrogance and loss. His phone would stop ringing with offers. His reputation would wither under the weight of his own words. That was his poetic justice, silence where he once commanded the floor. Weeks later, the community gathered at a candlelight vigil for Jamal. The park overflowed, families, elders, children, neighbors. Candles flickered like stars against the dark, each flame a small act of defiance against forgetting. Monica stood at the front, her hands trembling as she held her candle. She had spoken so many times in court, but this was different. This was no performance, no cross-examination. This was raw. This was real. "My son," she began softly, "wasn't perfect. None of our kids are. But he was good. He was kind. And he deserved a chance to grow, to learn, to live. They tried to tell me my voice didn't matter. They tried to make me invisible. But I stood, and I spoke, and I will keep speaking, because silence only protects the guilty. And I won't let silence bury my child." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Candles lifted higher. She took a breath, her voice breaking, then steadying. "So I say to every parent, every child, every person here tonight, don't you ever let them tell you you're irrelevant. Don't you ever let them strip your worth. Stand. Speak. Fight. Because justice isn't given, it's demanded. The crowd roared. Not with anger, but with resolve. The sound was collective, a promise, a movement taking root. And in that sound, Monica finally felt it, the closure she hadn't found in the verdict alone. Her son's name wasn't just cleared in a courtroom, it was carried forward in the mouths of her community. Somewhere deep inside, she knew Jamal would never be forgotten. His name would live in every candle, every march, every whisper of resistance against dismissal. That was the second justice, not the gavel's echo, but the heartbeat of a community awakened. And the moral, clear as the night sky lit with hundreds of flames, was this: you cannot silence truth. You cannot erase love. And you cannot call a mother irrelevant. Because when a mother stands, she carries not only her child but her whole community with her. And when a community answers back, no lawyer, no system, no arrogance can hold it down. Justice may start in a courtroom, but it lives in us all. Never underestimate the power of truth spoken from the margins. The ones dismissed as irrelevant are often the ones history will remember as unstoppable. That day, justice wasn't just about a verdict, it was about a voice. A mother's dignity stood taller than arrogance, and a jury proved that truth cannot be silenced. Remember this: every story matters, every voice counts, and no one is ever irrelevant. If this story moved you, subscribe to Unheard Evidence. Together, we give power back to the voices the world too often tries to erase.